Hello and welcome to the Busy Pastor Podcast. We're here to encourage and equip pastors to be busy with the right things. My name is Trent Stewart. I'm the lead pastor at Foothills Church and a coach at Courage to Lead. If you don't have a ministry coach, I would love to coach you. You can find more info out on busypastor.org. Today, we're continuing our conversation on defining your church's vision and mission. Today, my guest is Pastor Taylor Knight. He's our campus pastor here at Foothills Church. So Taylor, thanks for joining me again.
Yeah, glad to be here.
We talked about what it looks like to create vision and values for your church. And so if you missed it, go back and listen to the previous podcast. But there's probably a lot of ministry leaders, Taylor, who have already created mission, vision, values, all that stuff. And so today, I want to talk about how we live those out.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's we all know, we've seen so many church websites or even interiors of churches that have these values plastered on the wall, listed on a website. But when you get up close and personal, it's like, do you really value these things?
Yeah, right. They look nice.
Yeah. Beautiful fonts, beautiful signage.
Yeah.
But how have we kept the mission and vision of our church beyond just being words on a wall?
Yeah. A few ways. Regular evaluation. We have to frequently look at whether or not what we're doing actually aligns with the mission. And so I find that a lot of ministry leaders have a hard time saying no. And so people have a lot of good ideas in your church. Staff members have a lot of good ideas. And so they want to start programs. They want to start these things. And before you know it, you've got a host of activities and programs and things happening. And when you really dial in on what those ministries or programs do, it doesn't really impact your vision or values. It's not moving the needle on what you say you care about. And so then you've got to make hard decisions, and there's some leadership and change there, but you regularly have to evaluate the things that you're doing and ask that question: does this align, with our mission and vision? I think another helpful thing is to celebrate your wins. So when we actually see that what we're doing is accomplishing a value, then let's tell that story. Let's encourage each other. Let's high five that. That keeps the vision alive. If we're not telling stories of how people are being impacted, then really ministry can become a job just like any other job. It's just like I come and I clock in, I clock out, I'm doing a bunch of tasks. And so how is God working in your church? Where he's working in people's lives. And so what we want to do is share those stories, and that keeps that vision alive. And then I think engagement, obviously, are people engaging in the things that we say we value? So we want to see, are people actually involved in these things? Are they actually doing these things? And is it accomplishing what we had hoped to set out for? And then another way, finally, is just data. So let's nerd out for a minute here on data, because are we really accomplishing what we say we want to accomplish? Well, the data is what's going to show us if that's actually true in a lot of ways. Now, you can't track spiritual growth in somebody's life, but there are many things that we can track in church that give us a sense that we are, taking the ball down the field a little bit on what we're trying to do. And so if we say Jesus is life, as we do, and we believe in the gospel is the power to transform lives, then that means that we want to see salvations. We want to see people getting baptized. And so it's hard to say that we value evangelism if we aren't really seeing anybody come to faith, and if we're not seeing anybody getting baptized. And so that's a hard reality for a ministry leader to kind of face, the cold, hard facts. I think Patrick Lencioni was famous for that. Like the brutal fact, when you're looking at your values is an important step. And so I'm always shocked when, leaders don't know the answer to simple questions about their ministry. And so I think if we're going to, let's just talk about being evangelistically effective. I think a good metric is to have 12 conversions for every 100 people in attendance yearly.
It's good.
So if you have 100 people attending your church, I would say if you want to consider yourself, and this is a rule of thumb, this is not like,
Yeah, it's not an exact science.
it's not exact science or anything like that. It's just like, hey, this is, let's put the bar somewhere.
Yeah.
And so, a church running 100, 12 conversions in baptisms was a pretty awesome feat. That's
Yeah.
pretty great.
Yeah.
So if you're anywhere around that number, you should celebrate that, with your church. And so I think if a church is running 1,000, 120, I skipped one, 500 people, that'd be 60 people. 1,000 people would be, 120. If you're leading a church running 2,000, 240 would be great. 5,000 people coming to your church, then 600 conversions and so forth. That kind of gives us a rule of thumb to say, okay, we believe in evangelism, Jesus's life, we value that. So that is kind of a cool metric that you can kind of look at and see if, what's our data based, look like as far as that. So you track those things. We don't go to seminary or we don't go into ministry because of data, but you've got a volunteer, you've got a staff member who loves that stuff. And they'll track it, and they can put some things together to help you understand. Let's talk about small groups, for a second. If we're actually developing disciples, that means we're putting people in groups. And so, are our groups working? So apprenticeship, do we have a co-leader who is effectively growing as a leader in every group? That'd be a metric to follow. Do every one of our small groups have that? I would say, we hope so. We think so.
Yeah.
We're tracking it.
We are tracking it.
And if they don't, what are some of the things that you would do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love that you brought that up because it's something that is easily measurable, and we measure how many small groups we have, how many people are leading, how many are co-leading. And I think if we saw some lack of that, like what you just mentioned, a lack of co-leaders, then we go into our coaching system and say, okay, all right, coaches, let's set a goal. 5 of the small groups that you're leading don't have a co-leader. Go teach them how you did that. Teach them how to shoulder tap. Teach them how to call that out. And it's just development, right? You're coaching people how to develop other people and how to call people into leadership, and you're doing that with the values. If we value, which we do, that discipleship is a relational thing, that growth happens in relationships, then you're using that vision and that value to call out towards that goal.
What you're talking about is pastoring.
Yeah, that sounds right.
That's shepherding, and so shepherding people is keeping watch over them. It's creating systems to help them move closer to Jesus. And if you don't know what direction your people are actually moving, then you're missing an opportunity to grow the kingdom of God. And so that's where data comes into play, and it's as simple as, do we have co-leaders? And then it's tracking that down and chasing the sheep and challenging the sheep, and then telling them why, and then encouraging them, giving them a playbook for what that looks like. And, you guys do a great job of creating that for our people. But all of this is about, simple tracking of data to see if what we say and what we put on the wall, if we're actually doing it. And so I would encourage people just to kind of think through that today and use some of what we just discussed to help them take the next step.
Absolutely. Well, could you give us some examples of a time when staying aligned with our vision has made a big difference? Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're evidence of it right now, in a season where, there's not we're searching for a student pastor. And so in a season where we don't have that lead person, one of our values is the next gen matters. And so we've seen so many people on our staff step up and lead in those gaps.
Yeah.
And to me, that is worthy of celebration. When you see your team rallying around values organically, I didn't have to, hey, can you, I didn't have, it's just like, hey, people stepping into that is fantastic. And so I think that that's true of our volunteers as well, who have stepped up their game And that is true of our coaches, of our small group leaders in student ministry, and just our team in general, filling those gaps.
Yeah. Well, I think that also speaks. We talked about this last time a little bit, but if those values hadn't already been ingrained and taught and
Hmm.
celebrated and evaluated, all these things you talked
Yeah,
about, we didn't react with doing that,
right.
right? Those were built in, and so for either whether it was staff people or it was our volunteers, people in our church,
Hmm.
they already valued that the
Hmm.
next generation matters. It
Yeah,
wasn't responding or
yeah.
reacting
That's a
to
great
that.
point.
And
I,
so
I love
it's
that
beautiful.
because the flip side of that could have been, oh, well, let's make the next gen values a value and let me preach on that. And then we'll get people to rally around us and then help us do this. Well,
Yeah.
that'd have been a nightmare. That would have been
Yeah.
so difficult. So to your point, if someone's wondering, why do I need to have these values? Why is this so important? Why is everybody, talking about this, and why do I have to actually live them out? Well, that's a great example of how they benefit you in the long run.
Yeah. Or even the antithesis of that. Like if that crisis came and you didn't see people rise up, even though you tried to communicate and evaluate or whatever, then you've just, if you're honest with yourself, we must not value this.
Yeah,
We must have not casted accurate vision or helpful vision or
yeah,
whatever.
it didn't land.
Yeah. How do you adapt mission and vision over time without losing focus?
There's a tendency, I think, to learn somebody else's values and want to jump, into a statement or something that they say,
Mm,
or your church is potentially going to change those over time, right? That's not a sin to change those things. I love what Will Mancini writes in Church Unique. He talks about granite and sand and how some things are written in granite. Those are the essential doctrines of who God is, the Bible, Jesus, salvation, Holy Spirit, all these essential core doctrines and beliefs that we hold to. That's written in granite. Those things don't change. But what's written in sand are the programs, the ways in which we communicate, the structure that we might have in place. All of this is sand, right? This can
yeah.
change, and statements can change, and those songs that we sing today, are going to be different in 10 years. And
Mhm.
so all of that stuff is in sand. It can change. There was a season where certain programs worked in the life of a church in the 90s that doesn't necessarily work anymore effectively. And so I think we just have to be honest as leaders and cascade this vision to our people of our churches that, hey, what worked then doesn't necessarily work now. And how do we prove that? Data.
Yeah.
Here's the data. Nobody's getting saved. Not very many people are coming. Whatever that is. And so I think, we always have to be evaluating, and we have to be careful about changing too much, too fast. So that's why when we create our vision, values, those kinds of things, we need to spend adequate time, really, really processing what we have so that we're not ready to, change it next year. That wouldn't be helpful.
Yeah. When you mentioned the 90s and different things, I had like a list of, I won't call anyone out, but I
Yeah, you
had a
don't have to
list
call
of
them out.
things
Lots of
that,
things.
yeah, that's good because I've heard you use that analogy multiple times, not just to our staff, but with our church to coach us along in making sure that we don't deviate from what's in granite and
Hmm.
being appropriately loose handed with what is in sand. So, what else would you say about in regards to those same mission and values? How do you stay passionate about those things and driving towards those values? Because I'm sure if you have had those values for a while,
Hmm.
it could be easy
Yeah.
to grow weary in pursuing them or
Yeah.
celebrating them.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a great question for every ministry leader. I mean, this is a challenge. Some leaders listening might be discouraged. Some of them might be tired. Maybe they're not seeing the fruit from their labor.
Mm.
In fact, next episode, I want to talk about reviving the weary shepherd. And so I want to encourage some tired pastors, ministry leaders. And so that'll be the next one. But yeah, I mean, I think I see this in guys that I coach often. They've lost their passion. They're tired. And so this is what I'll say today. I think the mission is rooted in the Great Commission. And so that is where we need to get our fuel. Right? First, obviously, our relationship with Jesus. But the why behind why we're doing this is the Great Commission. Our love for God and our calling to make disciples. And so if you got into ministry to build a big church or to build a building, you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
We don't do ministry to build buildings and stand in front of large crowds. It's great when churches grow, but if that's your why, you're going to be disappointed because your church might grow and you might still feel empty. It's just like in the secular world, the guy that thinks, the next paycheck or the next sale or the bigger, business or becoming CEO is going to finally make them feel fulfilled. I see it in pastors all the time. Like they accomplish what they had hoped to accomplish. And it's just like, well, now what? And so ministry can be exhausting, and it feels oftentimes like the weight of the world is on, your shoulders. But I think it's important to know that you're not alone. God sees your unseen sacrifices, every late night prayer, every burden that you carry for your people. I think your faithfulness matters, even when it's unnoticed. I think we got to remember that God never called you to carry the weight of the ministry. He called you to be faithful and to trust him with the rest. And so he's still at work in ways that we cannot see. And so we have to take a deep breath. We have to rest in his presence. You're not just a shepherd. You are also a beloved son and a beloved daughter. And you don't want to forget that. I'm praying for you today that you would be renewed and refreshed and reminded of the deep joy of knowing Jesus. Taylor, thanks for being with me today.
Yeah.
And appreciate all that you do for our church and for everybody listening today. Hope this was helpful. If it was, I'd love for you to give the Busy Pastor podcast a good rating and share it with some ministry leaders. If you don't have a coach, I'd love to be your coach and help you get busy with the right things. Go to busypastor.org. I want to see you build the kingdom of God. You can follow us on Instagram at busypastor, and pray that you'll be with us next time. Until then, be busy with the right things.